over here at Bad Guy Inc. Studios, and we're discussing who is the most underrated fighter of all time. Now, I think I would probably need 30 minutes and 10 suggestions. And at that point, I would only scratch the surface of this debate. So let's shorten down the rules, and let me just throw 3 at you off the top of my head in no particular order. And I think with it more time, and I hope that you guys take advantage of the comment section, and we'll continue this thought. I want to hear from you. I'm going to start with Alexander Gustafsson, but I must give an explanation because I know what many of you are thinking. Chael, Gustafsson fought for world championships, and then he fought for other world championships, and he was headlining cards, and he's the biggest star from Sweden. He was put on the cover of the EA game opposite Jon Jones. What do you mean he was underrated? Okay, fair point by you, but Gus is as close to a world champion that wasn't a world champion that I've ever seen. And not just because he almost won it the night he fought Jon Jones the first time, but he also won it almost the night he fought Daniel Cormier. They both came down to the 5th round. They were both Gus versus Jon Jones, absolute bludgeoning of one another. One of the great light heavyweight fights of all time. Gus versus DC, one of the great fights of all time. Gus all of a sudden learns how to stop a takedown, and now DC's got to be stuck on his feet with this guy with long range and great footwork. I mean, it was just this classic, wonderful fight. And when it was over, you didn't know who won. When Gus versus Jones part 1 was over, I thought Gus won, but I'm not bullish, and I wouldn't bet $1 on it. I just said, oh boy, we're going to have a new champion, right? Real light on it, but that's how good of a fight it was. When Gus versus Daniel was done, I thought Daniel had beat him, but it ends up going to a split decision. One judge saw it the other way, and I wanted to argue with that judge. It was a very close fight. So the fact that Gus was just, I'm talking just millimeters away on 2 separate occasions from becoming a world champion and didn't do it, I'm going to throw Gus in there, and I'll tell you another guy that was underrated, and this is Marilla Bustamante. Now, any of you new fans, I'll explain who Marilla was. Any of you older fans are going, Chael, the guy was the world champion. How can you tell me he was underrated? Well, there's plenty of world champions that are underrated. Go see Demetrius Johnson. You think he got the respect he deserved? There is plenty of guys who have become world champion, but still didn't quite get the appreciation that they should have gotten. Marilla Bustamante, the first time I saw him, fought in something, and I believe it was called the Contenders. And I could be wrong, and it really doesn't matter, but the bottom line was it was at the time when the sport was putting 8 guys in a bracket. You start out in the quarterfinals, and you move right through until you have a champion, meaning whoever wins the weight has to beat 3 guys in one night. Whoever gets second in the tournament has to fight 3 men in one night. By the way, should I mention, the commissions were different back then. You did not have to wear gloves, which meant most guys went bare knuckle. Oh, and should I also include, there was no weight restrictions. They would hold a weigh-in, but that was only for marketing purposes. There was no weight class that you had to meet. So Marilla Bustamante, who weighs 187 pounds, ends up in the finals with Tom Erickson, who weighs 263 pounds. Tom Erickson was a guy that I had known. I used to watch him when I was a child. He wrestled in the national finals every single year for 11 straight years against Bruce Baumgartner, who goes down as the greatest heavyweight wrestler of all time. So Erickson is now on top of Marilla Bustamante. Erickson is not equipped with finishing techniques all the way down to ground and pound. It was more of just an idea. Like the training wasn't even, back then it's not even what it is now. Okay, we're going to fight. What are the rules? Tell me. Okay, so what should I try to do? Try to take the guy down and then try to hit him from there? Okay, I'll go try to do those things. That was where Tom was at. But Marilla wasn't in a much better spot. Hey, Marilla, this guy's probably going to get on top of you. Try to submit him. And if you can't, just try to not get your face beat in. Oh, and by the way, you have 30 minutes to do it or we're going to call this whole thing a draw. which is exactly what happened. Marilla Bustamante, at less than 190 pounds, went 30 minutes with Tom Erickson, who is nothing less than a bear. Marilla then goes on to win a world championship. I'm trying to recall who he beat the night that he won the championship, and I want to say that it was Dave Manet. I believe he beat Dave Manet, but I know he defended that championship against Matt Lindland. And I know that because it was part of match training camp and prepared for Marilla Bustamante. So I'm going to throw him in there. And I'm going to tell you another one, and it's Maurice Smith. And I think in many ways, Maurice did get his credit at the time. But this time was in the very late 90s. And what Maurice Smith had done, Maurice Smith was a world champion kickboxer, and kickboxers simply did not have a place in mixed martial arts at that time. They were not equipped with any type of submission game. They were not equipped with any type of takedown defense, and they most certainly were not equipped with any type of takedown or top control themselves. Those things would just never cross your mind as you're preparing a kickboxing career. So Maurice comes along, and he had done very well in a different organization. He had done very well. He fought a guy named Conan Silveira, and Conan Silveira is currently the head coach of the American Top Team. Coaches all their best athletes from Masvidal to Amanda Nunes by example. Great fighter, big guy, grappling heavy. He gets on top of Maurice. Maurice found a way to get a sweep. And from there, that was kind of like the first time we ever saw a kickboxer able to show a grappling prowess. All it was a sweep. But Maurice still found the sweep, and then he was able to find the finish of the fight. But that was a very big deal that the world kickboxing champion was able to sweep Conan. Okay, store that away. Because Maurice ends up in the UFC, and he finds himself in a world title fight against Mark Coleman. Now, the buck stops at Mark Coleman. And this is back in the day, again, no gloves, but you could also headbutt. This was back in the day when advertised was no eye gouging, no biting. The reality was there was pages of rules, but this was still in the day that for broad strokes for the layman's, this was billed and marketed and advertised as only two rules: no biting, no eye gouging. I bring that up because headbutts were still legal. And Mark Coleman, from a top position, could just simply start ramming his head into yours and using it like a sledgehammer, of which he did, to Maurice Smith. But Maurice Smith found a way to keep his calm. He found a way to keep his cool. And Maurice secretly started training with Frank Shamrock. And Frank Shamrock, in that period of time, wanted to work on his stand-up skills, so that's where he liked to team up with Maurice, but Maurice knew he needed to work on his guard and his ground control and some of his wrestling paralysis defensively. That's where Frank came in. So these guys formed like this incredible alliance, and they started working together a lot, and Maurice started to learn very quickly. One big problem that Mark Coleman had in that fight, just to take you guys back, and I'm going down memory lane, but the biggest problem that Mark Coleman had wasn't an inability to put Maurice down where he wanted him and begin to bludgeon. It wasn't even having to worry about Maurice throwing up a submission because Maurice never even tried. When Maurice was on bottom, he tried to get guard, he tried to hold, he tried to protect himself, find himself back on his feet. All of which happened. The difference was Maurice Smith, because of how many fights he had, K1, kickboxing, all the different. The difference was that Maurice Smith had an ability to stay calm under pressure. Mark Coleman had an inexperience, which then cursed him with the inability to stay calm while under aggression. He was having an adrenaline dump. He was seeing blood in the water. He was going for the kill, and he used all of his energy. And Maurice was able to weather the storm. They get back on the feet, and all of a sudden, Mark's having a harder time, largely because of exhaustion, but that's fair game in a fight. But he's having a harder time getting his hands on Maurice. He's having a harder time dragging Maurice down, and Maurice starts landing these chopping leg kicks. And he's distracting Mark with jabs. Boom, and a leg kick comes. And he distracts Mark with a kick or with a cross, and another leg kick comes. And he starts wearing Mark Coleman down. Now Mark Coleman is changing stances. Now Mark Coleman, you can see it on his face. There's a level of exhaustion, and I've been there. And most human beings will never reach it. And I do not fault you if you don't. You are no lesser of a man if you don't. It's a very vulnerable and a very scary position, but when you reach a level of fatigue that you can no longer defend yourself, you have a lifetime of skills and techniques stored up and within you, but you do not have the energy to execute. It is a very, very frightening position, and this is the position that Mark Coleman found himself in. So Maurice Smith wins. Huge upset. First time kickboxer had ever taken out a wrestler, at least this level of kickboxer versus this level of wrestler. Maurice Smith becomes the world champion, but Maurice Smith also helped to change the sport that day. He opened people's eyes that day to the highest of levels. And nobody really understood just how effective kickboxing was. You always respected it. And you always knew this was a powerful thing, but it always had seemed up until that point that the only way kickboxing is going to work is if you have a dance partner who kickboxes back. If you have a dance partner who is going to not kickbox back, but going to grab and grapple and throw and submit and stretch and strangle, you're in trouble. Maurice showed the world, no, you're not. You do have to learn how to stay on your feet. You do need to learn how to understand space and distance and range. But kickboxing works in MMA. It was a very big deal. And Maurice was appreciated at that time, and Maurice was recognized at that time. But I feel as time has gone by that Maurice is one of the more underappreciated fighters in MMA history.